Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. Michelle and I have been married for 16 mostly great years, and we have a beautiful 14-year-old daughter named Emma. Initially, we wanted another child, but our careers kept us busy, and we were content with just Emma, so we decided not to have more. I love my family deeply and always believed we had a loving marriage and a strong bond. I've always considered myself fortunate to be married to an intelligent and attractive woman, though I sometimes wondered if having such a stunning wife might bring some challenges. I was always amazed that a woman as gorgeous as Michelle chose to marry a guy like me, average looking at best. Whenever I mentioned this, Michelle would laugh and say, "I guess I just felt sorry for you, Dave. You looked so down when we met, and I just had to cheer you up." I'd always reply, "Well, you sure did a fantastic job. After meeting you, I've never felt down again. I love you." And she'd always smile and say, "I love you too, Dave." That teasing back and forth always made us laugh, but lately, her words have stuck with me. Michelle was right about one thing. I was feeling pretty low when we first met. I had just gone through a tough breakup with my college girlfriend, who I dated for 3 years. She ended things because she'd met someone else from her hometown and wanted to pursue that relationship. There was no dishonesty involved. She was just being honest, saying she didn't want to start something behind my back and preferred to end things before it got messy. I respected her for being upfront, but it still hurt. After the breakup, I graduated with an accounting degree, landed a job, and focused on my career as a single guy. I dated here and there, but no one caught my interest, and I threw myself into work, building a solid career and making decent money. I met Michelle by chance at a party hosted by my friend Mike Thompson, a buddy from college. Mike and his wife, Sarah, were always trying to set me up with different women. It was at one of these parties that I met Michelle. She was introduced to me, and we hit it off immediately. Michelle is a tall, vibrant blonde with a beautiful face and a slim yet curvy figure. Mike mentioned she just ended things with her boyfriend, which I found hard to believe because she was so stunning. Why would any guy walk away from a woman like her? Michelle told me she was studying art and would be graduating soon. She was not only beautiful but smart, funny, outgoing, and easy to talk to. We spent most of the night chatting and ended up meeting again the following weekend. We started dating and quickly grew close, becoming a couple not long after. At first, Michelle made it clear she was still seeing other guys, but after a few months we were exclusive, or at least I was. It took her a little longer, but eventually I knew she was only interested in me. By the time I met Michelle, I was already established in my career as a CPA and making good money. I think the fact that I could afford to take her to places her previous boyfriends couldn't was a big factor in her decision to be with me. I'd like to think it was my charm and personality that won her over, but I've always been realistic about who I am. I'm just an average-looking, quiet guy. Definitely not a ladies' man. Our chemistry was great, though, and I believed her when she said her past was behind her. She told me she loved me and only me, and I took her at her word. Not long after, I proposed, and when she said yes, it was the happiest day of my life. Mike Thompson and I have been friends for years. We've played sports together, hung out, and shared a lot of good times. Even after he got married, we stayed close. When his marriage to Sarah started to fall apart, I tried to help him cope. It turned out that Mike had been unfaithful, and Sarah found out. She hired a tough lawyer, and Mike ended up losing a lot. Mike is a good-looking guy, louder and more outgoing than I am, and once he was single, women were drawn to him. He dated some attractive women, bringing them around for dinners and parties, but none of his relationships lasted long. Michelle and I would often talk about his situation, and she was the one who kept encouraging me to invite him over. She insisted Mike needed our support, saying he was struggling with the divorce, although I never saw him having any trouble getting dates. Michelle was adamant that we stay close to him and help him move on from the bad memories of his marriage. I often told Michelle she didn't need to worry about Mike so much. I didn't want to badmouth my friend, so I never mentioned that he was a bit of a liar and a cheater who probably deserved his divorce. Instead, I'd remind her that Mike was a good-looking single guy with a solid job, and women seemed to gravitate toward him wherever we went. Michelle would always disagree, insisting that Mike was just dealing with his depression over his failed marriage. She'd say he was our friend, and we shouldn't abandon him. I usually went along with her view and continued the friendship. After all, he'd been my best friend for years, and truthfully, I liked having him around. Things went on like this for quite some time, but over the last few months, I started noticing some changes. Mike still visited frequently, but Michelle would bring up his supposedly fragile emotional state more and more often. It was strange because Mike never seemed depressed to me, but I'd gotten used to Michelle's constant concern about him, so I didn't think much of it. However, things started to feel off around our house, and my suspicion grew. I was working long hours as an accountant, but my career had hit a plateau over the past couple of years. Despite my efforts, I hadn't received the promotion I felt I deserved. I still managed to maintain a decent income and provide a good life for Michelle, Emma, and myself, but it was frustrating. Michelle was working part-time at an art studio, bringing in a little extra income, so our finances were stable, though not improving much. After a decade at my firm, I wasn't earning as much as I thought I should, given the hours I put in. I was hoping for a raise, but when the economy took a downturn, my company decided on layoffs instead. I kept my job, but my salary was reduced. Fortunately, Michelle was still working, and we lived pretty modestly. But when I told her we needed to cut back on some expenses, she was stunned. I explained that we'd need to cancel our annual vacation and scale back on other luxuries, like our frequent nights out. We used to go out every weekend, to dinner, dancing, or a show, but I told Michelle it wasn't sustainable given our financial situation. She was shocked and didn't understand why. After all these years of hard work, we were suddenly struggling. I explained that my income had dropped, and any hopes of a promotion in the near future were slim. Michelle loved having an active social life with her friends, many of whom were a bit snobbish, and she enjoyed dressing up for fancy events. In the past, I'd reluctantly gone along with her wishes when she accepted invitations to various galas, but with my reduced income, our mortgage, car payments, and Emma's education fund to consider, we had to make some sacrifices. Michelle wasn't happy when I told her we couldn't keep up with our usual lifestyle. She was especially upset when I suggested cutting back on dining out with her friends at expensive restaurants. Naturally, that led to an argument, which eventually turned into a heated fight about our future. I didn't think much of it at first when Mike happened to be around during some of these arguments. He'd been coming over several times a week, so it was inevitable that he'd witnessed some of our disputes. It was awkward, especially when he seemed to take Michelle's side. He'd listen quietly and then chime in with comments that seemed neutral but, in hindsight, always leaned toward agreeing with her. Whenever I mentioned cutting back on outings, Michelle would turn to Mike and ask what he thought. He'd act like he was pondering it, but would inevitably agree with her, often repeating her arguments and even offering to help us financially if needed. That offer rubbed me the wrong way. Mike would suggest driving us if we wanted to go somewhere with a cover charge, and he'd even offer to pay for any entry fees. If we were invited to a party, he'd offer to cover the cost of a gift so we wouldn't have to go empty-handed. I thanked him but always declined. While I wanted to make Michelle happy, it bothered me that Mike kept trying to bail us out. I knew he could afford it since he had left his old job and was doing quite well in a new sales position. One evening, Michelle invited Mike over for dinner without telling me, which had become pretty regular. As usual, she was a great hostess, and we enjoyed a nice conversation over the delicious meal she had cooked. After Emma went off to do her homework, we moved to the living room and opened a bottle of wine. We hadn't even finished our first glass when Michelle brought up the upcoming annual charity event that we always attended. I'd completely forgotten about it, but she was quick to remind me how many of our friends would be there and how nice the event always was. I already knew how much it would cost, and when I explained that we couldn't afford any parties this month, Mike chimed in. He said he understood my point of view, but it was a charity event, and it wouldn't feel right not to contribute. Michelle's face lit up in his words, and when Mike offered to cover the cost, she was thrilled. I, however, was annoyed. Mike knew our financial situation and where I stood on the matter. I guess I expected my best friend to back me up, but he didn't. Michelle listened to my objections, but then she gave me a sharp look and glanced at Mike. They shared a look that immediately raised my suspicions. "Come on, Dave," Mike said pointedly. "This is an annual event, and it'd be a shame to skip it over a few bucks." I told him we'd been going for years, and while I was disappointed too, we needed to manage our expenses carefully this month because of the large mortgage payment. "We just have to go, sweetheart," Michelle insisted, patting my hand. "I know it'll be a little tight, but everyone we know will be there." Mike added, "You know the guys would love to see you, Dave. Everyone's looking forward to it. It'll be a blast." Before I could respond, Michelle chimed in excitedly. "We had so much fun last year, remember?" I shook my head, but Michelle gave me a determined glare. "I'm serious, Dave. We have to go. All our friends will be there, and I've already talked to Lyndon and Kate. I don't want them thinking we don't support charity." I understood where she was coming from, but all I could think about was how badly we needed to get our finances under control. "If we keep spending like this, we'll be the ones needing charity," I said firmly. "It's just not in the budget this year, maybe next time." "But it'll be a blast," Mike insisted with a smile. "Of course, it will," Michelle chimed in, then turned to Mike with a pout. "But Dave just doesn't want to go." Mike questioned my decision again, but before I could respond, Michelle started complaining about how frugal I was. She didn't hold back, listing all the times she couldn't do what she wanted because I refused. "You see, Mike," she said, ignoring me, "I'm trying to enjoy a great social life, but Dave's just getting stingy in his old age." She made me sound like some grumpy old man. I tried to keep my cool, but it wasn't easy. "I'm not being frugal, Michelle, just realistic. We're in a slump financially, and spending money we don't have is reckless. I don't want us to overextend ourselves, but think of the good we can do." Mike quickly added, "It's for charity, right, Dave?" "Of course I know that," I replied, irritated. "But it's $75 a plate, plus the parking fees at the club. After an overpriced dinner we can't afford, there's the charity auction where we'll be expected to bid on stuff we'll never use. Charity or not, we just can't swing it." That set off a heated argument about my job struggles and reduced salary. Mike already knew some of it, but these were sensitive topics I preferred to keep private. Michelle could sense my vulnerability and invented even more, openly sharing her frustrations about our lifestyle and her disappointment in me with Mike. I didn't want her airing all of that, but it was too late. I explained again that we had to prioritize Emma's education and keep up with the mortgage payments. I hoped that would make Michelle see reason, but she was unsympathetic. "See what I mean?" Michelle sneered, glancing hopefully at Mike. "He always finds some excuse not to go out." I was furious. They were openly ganging up on me, countering every point I made, dismissing my concerns. Michelle stared at Mike, waiting for him to say something to back her up. Mike glanced at her, then turned to me with a sympathetic look. "Well, Dave, how about I cover it?" he offered quickly. "I don't want to go by myself, and I've got the cash. It's no big deal. It would be my pleasure to take you and Michelle out. We always have a great time, and I'd be disappointed if you weren't there. After all, you've been there for me since my divorce, so consider this my way of repaying you. I'd love your company, and I'll even drive and cover the babysitter." "Really?" Michelle squealed, thrilled that someone was swooping in to save the day. "Oh my gosh, Mike. Thank you so much. Before I could reject his offer, she rushed over, hugged him, and kissed him, repeatedly thanking him. I was beyond irritated, not just at Mike's constant contradiction of my decisions, but also at Michelle's over-the-top reaction. She completely disregarded my feelings and practically threw herself at him. As Michelle continued to gush, hugging him like he was her savior, I shot Mike a disapproving look. He accepted her praise with a bashful grin, while I sat across the table, stewing in anger and disgust. Despite what Michelle said, I had no intention of accepting anyone's assistance, not even from a friend. I was most put off by her overly affectionate response. At that point, Mike had his arm around her waist while she kissed his cheek and hugged him warmly. I quickly rejected his offer in no uncertain terms. My pride wouldn't allow me to take a handout from anyone. They stopped hugging, and Michelle regarded me with a cool expression. "Come on, Dave," Mike said, noticing my dark mood. "Don't be upset. Let's just go to the event and have some fun. We can worry about the money later." "No way," I snapped. "I'm serious about this." "Oh, just be quiet, Dave," Michelle shot back. "You can sulk all you want, but we're going, and that's final." "We'll see about that," I muttered. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind, then shook her head, pulled away from Mike, and marched into the kitchen. Grabbing her phone, she called one of her friends. With Michelle in the other room, Mike and I sat there in silence. I glared at him, both of us listening as my wife chattered away. Mike looked uncomfortable as Michelle's voice bubbled with excitement. "Oh yes, we're going. I told you we would." She laughed into the phone. "Yeah, I know, but Mike came through for us. He's such a good friend." Then her voice dropped to a level where I couldn't hear anymore. She peeked into the living room, gave me a smug look, and moved back to the other room to continue her conversation in private. After that confrontation, my friendship with Mike was shattered. I had expected him to back me up, but he clearly wasn't bothered about going against me. He tried to explain that he just wanted Michelle and me to have a good time, but in my mind, he had taken sides, and it wasn't with me. A while later, Michelle came back into the room with a huge grin, thanking Mike again, hugging him, and kissing his cheek. It seemed excessive, and she didn't seem to want to let go of him. I reiterated that we weren't going, and that was my final decision. Mike tried to interject, and Michelle clung to him, insisting she was going and wouldn't hear any more of it. I kept shaking my head, but neither of them was listening. They seemed determined to use the time before the event to sway me. Looking back, that argument might have marked the beginning of the end of my once happy marriage. The week before the charity event, the tension in our house was palpable. Even Emma noticed. She was 14, but she was naive. She knew about the charity event and could sense the unresolved conflict between Michelle and me. "What's wrong, Dad?" she asked one day when Michelle was out of the room. "I know you and Mom are fighting about something. She wants to accept charity, and I don't," I told her. "Charity? You mean like welfare or something?" she asked. "Not exactly, but it might as well be welfare," I replied. "I wasn't raised to rely on anyone. It's about pride, sweetheart," I explained to Emma. "Once you start taking money from others, it's hard to stop. I've never taken charity in my life, and I'm not about to start now." "This is about that charity event, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes, Emma. We just can't afford it, and I'm not going to take a handout just to put on a show for our friends." "But Mom said it's for Uncle Mike," she replied, watching my reaction closely. "He's your friend, isn't he? I'm sure he doesn't see it as charity, just one friend helping another." "Is that how your mother put it?" I asked, feeling my frustration rise. Emma looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Well, we talked about it a little," she admitted. It wasn't surprising. I knew Michelle was trying to get Emma on her side behind my back. The thought of my clever wife using our daughter to sway me made my blood boil. "I'm sure your mom told you all about it," I said, trying to stay calm. "But whether it's from a friend or not, it's still charity. I don't want you growing up thinking we're that hard up." My dad never accepted charity, no matter how tough things got, and we've got it a lot easier than he did. But Dad, it's just a party, Emma argued. It's not like we're taking cash, you know. And Uncle Mike is our friend. It annoyed me how often she called him Uncle Mike. It was clear that's how Michelle must talk about him when I'm not around. I answered her more harshly than I intended. If your Uncle Mike was really my friend, he'd keep his mouth shut, stay out of my business, and leave my family alone. My bitter words startled Emma, and she pulled back, looking scared before running up to her room and slamming the door. I felt bad for speaking so bluntly, but I was tired of hearing about Mike and his generosity. I needed my family to back me up, but it was clear that wasn't happening. Every day, Michelle would shoot me a smug look, and I kept insisting that we weren't going to that charity event, with or without Mike's help. Each time the topic came up, we'd end up arguing. A few days before the event, Michelle confronted me, clearly fed up. "Listen, Dave," she said, her irritation obvious. "I don't know why you're getting so worked up about this. You know we go to this event every year, and I don't plan on missing it just because you're having some issues at work. I know we're in a bit of a financial rough patch, but we're not poor, and we still need to keep up appearances. If we don't go, all my friends will know something's wrong, and I don't want to be the subject of their gossip. So that's it." I snapped. "I'm not man enough for you now." "Oh, stop it, Dave," she retorted. "Of course, you're a man, but grow up. It's not all about the gossip, but yes, I want us to look good. We've made a lot of friends, and I want to have a good time with them. Don't you want to be seen with me?" "That's not fair, and you know it," I replied. "I love you, Michelle, and I always have. But this argument is really upsetting me. I thought you'd support me as my wife and understand our situation, but I guess I was wrong. If you want to disrespect me this much, just go without me." "You jerk," she yelled, her anger boiling over. "You think I'm not a good wife. That's a load of nonsense, and you know it. For 16 years, I've taken care of you and Emma without complaining, even though there's been plenty I could have griped about." "Like what?" I challenged, feeling the tension rise. She glared at me, and the silence hung heavy between us. "So, you're really going to stay mad about this?" she asked bitterly. "I thought I could convince you that a night out would be good for us. We haven't gone out on a real date in months, and I'm sick of it." "That's not true. We go out to dinner as a family every week, and we go dancing occasionally, just not at those fancy places you're obsessed with. I've told you, Michelle, we can't afford it right now. Once Emma's education is secured, we'll have more room to breathe." Michelle looked at me like she tasted something sour, her expression shifting to one of calm triumph. "If you won't give me this one night out, then I guess I'll have to be Mike's date. I'm sure he'll be happy to have me, even if you're not. And don't think it'll just be a friendly night. I plan to give him all the attention I would have given you. I know he'll appreciate it." "You witch," I snapped, angrier than I'd been in a long time. "I should have known you had this planned. Go ahead, be his date, but don't think I'll forget this betrayal or Mike's part in it." I stormed out of the room and slammed the door, hearing Michelle's voice trailing after me. "You all, I'm going, whether you like it or not." As I stormed off, I passed through the living room. Emma was watching TV, and I knew she'd heard everything. She glanced at me with a scared look, and I wanted to hug her, to comfort her, but I was too angry at Michelle to be gentle. So I went out to the patio and sat down, stilling. The day before the charity event, the tension in our house was unbearable. Mike called me several times throughout the week, trying to change my mind, but I wasn't budging. Our finances were tight, and we had to cut back. I had to face the reality, even if my wife refused to. If she wanted to make an issue of it, she was going to get her wish. On the night of the event, I made sure to stay out of the house until late, eating at a cheap diner. By the time I got home, Michelle and Emma had already finished dinner. I mumbled a greeting, and Emma said, "Hi, Dad." Michelle, on the other hand, ignored me and went straight to the bedroom, locking the door as she got ready for her night out with Mike. To avoid any confrontation, Michelle decided to drive to Mike's house first and leave from there. When she came downstairs, she made sure to strut around the living room, showing off her outfit. She wore a short, tight aqua dress I'd never seen before. It clung to her curves like a second skin. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless, and her high heels made her legs look fantastic. The charity event wasn't even that upscale, so seeing her so dressed up threw me for a loop. "Where'd you get that dress?" I asked, trying to mask my irritation. "Don't worry about it," she shot back. I wondered where she got the money for such an obviously expensive outfit, but I knew she wouldn't tell me, so I kept my mouth shut. Michelle ignored me and walked over to Emma, who was still watching TV. She leaned down and kissed her. "You look amazing, Mom. Like a movie star." Emma gushed, admiring Michelle's glamorous appearance. "Thanks, sweetie," Michelle said, her smile fading as she glanced over at me. She then told Emma loud enough for me to hear, "I know Uncle Mike will think so too. I just wish everyone felt the same way." Her comment was clearly aimed at me, and it made my blood boil. Michelle had never dressed up this nicely on any of our dates, but for Mike, she went all out. I knew this was going to be a problem. I looked at her with disgust and walked out of the room, making sure she knew I was furious. She got the message loud and clear. "Goodbye, Emma," Michelle said as she walked toward the door, speaking only to our daughter and ignoring me completely. "I might be out late, honey, so don't wait up." She walked out without looking back. Emma saw the dismal look on my face and gave me a sympathetic glance, which only made me angrier. I knew she hated being stuck in the middle of this mess, and I hated it too. Something about my own daughter pitting me really got under my skin. I marched into the den and fired off a quick text to my former best friend. "I thought we were friends, Mike. Now that you're dating my wife, I see you're just another deceitful person. After tonight, don't bother contacting me and don't consider yourself my friend. You're not welcome here anymore. Have fun with my wife." He replied almost immediately, "It's not a date, Dave, and you know it. I wanted you to come, but you're too stubborn. I'm just making sure Michelle has a good time and gets home safe. We'll talk later. Please don't be mad at me." I shot back, "Screw you." I didn't hear back after that. I tried to keep my mind off Michelle, but it was impossible. Emma and I watched TV, attempting to act like everything was normal, though I couldn't even remember what we watched. She knew I was upset, and to her credit, Emma spoke kindly to me, trying to lift my spirits. I appreciated her effort, but we both knew it was going to be a rough night. Around 10 p.m., Emma headed to bed, which was early for her. The awkwardness of the situation was clearly too much for her to handle. As I passed by her room later, I could hear her talking on her phone to someone. I eventually managed to fall asleep, but was woken up by the sound of the front door closing. I glanced at the clock, 2:30 a.m. I heard voices downstairs and knew it was Michelle and Mike. I got out of bed and peered into the living room. They were still by the front door, and Michelle was visibly drunk, clinging to Mike's arm to keep herself steady. Her hair was a mess, her eyes droopy, and she was swaying as she giggled. "Thanks for such a wonderful time tonight, Mikey," she slurred, laughing and hugging him close. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her body against his, and gave him a long, affectionate kiss on the lips far longer than was appropriate. Michelle seemed in no hurry to pull away, but Mike finally broke the kiss and glanced around nervously. "It was fun, but it's late," Mike said, trying to steer her inside. "You should get to bed now, Michelle." "But I don't want to go to bed. Dave might be worried about you," Mike tried to reason with her. "Screw him," she sneered with a drunken giggle. "He's such a wet blanket, and I had so much fun with you tonight. Let's do it again, okay?" I was standing at the top of the stairs, out of sight. Mike looked uneasy, glancing toward the hallway that led to our bedroom. He couldn't see me, but he probably suspected I might be listening. "Let's not talk about that right now," he told her. "Go get a shower, get some sleep, and try to make up with your husband." "Screw that," she slurred, collapsing back into his arms. "Why don't you stay and have a drink with me? It's not that late." "No, I don't think that's a good idea," Mike replied, clearly uncomfortable. "Oh, come on," she murmured, pulling his head down for another kiss. This time, Michelle went all in, French kissing him until he pushed her away. "Please, Michelle, I'm trying to keep us out of trouble," he chuckled. "You're making it really hard." My anger intensified when I saw her hand reach down and grab him through his trousers. "I can feel how fond you are," she giggled. "I've known since the first time we danced together." "Come on, don't go yet." Mike was smirking but gently moved her hand away. "You'd better stop." "Come on, Mike, I know you want to stay. Let's go to the sofa, and I'll show you how much I appreciate you tonight." "No, I'm serious, Michelle," Mike said, looking more anxious now. "You're a beautiful woman, but I don't want to cause any more trouble with Dave. We're friends, you know. And you're my friend too," Michelle slurred, her hand back on his. "Dave's asleep, and he doesn't care about me. I want you to be my special friend. Please, just stay for a little while." I couldn't stand another second of this nonsense. I stepped into the room, my face filled with fury. "Yeah, Mike," I said coldly, startling them both. "Why don't you be Michelle's special friend?" They both jumped at my sudden appearance. I continued sarcastically, "Why don't you stay a little longer and entertain my wife? After such a nice date, I'm sure she'd love that." Mike's eyes widened in shock, and he quickly pushed Michelle away. She stared at me with bloodshot eyes, struggling to focus. It took her a moment to regain some semblance of composure. "Listen, Dave," Mike began, but I cut him off. "No, you listen, jerk," I snapped. "I can see just how special you've been to my wife. Go ahead, take her to the sofa and give her what she wants." Mike shook his head sadly and turned to leave. Michelle grabbed his arm, desperate. "Shut up, Dave," she yelled. "Mike was kind to me all night, and he doesn't deserve this." "Then give him what he deserves, you witch," I shouted back. "You want him so badly. Go for it, you jerk," Michelle screamed, her face beet red. Mike looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. "Listen, Dave," Mike said apologetically. "I know this looks bad, but nothing happened. We had a good time, but that's it. I have your word on that, right?" I sneered, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it really looks like nothing happened." Mike glanced between us, his face filled with regret. He tried to explain, but I was done listening. "No, Mike, just leave," I said firmly. He nodded, turning to Michelle. "I'd better go now, Michelle. I'll help you get your car later if you need it." Mike tried to say more, but the look on my face stopped him. He twisted out of Michelle's grasp and hurried out the front door. As it closed behind him, Michelle seemed to deflate. She stumbled into the kitchen to get some water, probably trying to sober up. I left her there and went back to bed, knowing my marriage was now on shaky ground. The next morning, I found Michelle sprawled out on the sofa in that tight aqua dress, still hung over. I held back my anger and helped her upstairs, flopping her onto the bed without undressing her. I removed her heels, tossed a blanket over her, and left her there. She slept until late afternoon, looking as rough as I felt inside. After her behavior last night, I was furious, but I didn't want to show it. I needed to see how she'd handle it first. When she finally came down for dinner, she looked miserable. We didn't speak, and it was clear she had no intention of starting a conversation either. I stayed quiet, determined that Michelle would have to bring up her own behavior. She slept in the guest room, and for the rest of the weekend, we tiptoed around each other. She was so inebriated that I wasn't sure if Michelle even remembered much of what happened that night. She's not usually a drinker, so whatever she had that evening must have really affected her. Saturday morning, I made breakfast for Emma and myself. She mentioned seeing Michelle come home with Mike, and asked what the argument was about. I didn't give her much of an explanation, just saying we were still working through the charity event issue. Emma accepted my vague answer and left the house early, saying she was going over to a friend's place. I told her to call and check in after a few hours. I went to work on Monday as usual, while Michelle took a few extra days to recover and didn't go back to work until Wednesday. We didn't talk about that night until the middle of the next week. I think it took her that long to clear her head from all the alcohol she'd consumed. When she finally tried to apologize, she seemed embarrassed, but I was still too angry to accept any apology. I let her get out her "I'm sorry" before I turned around and walked away, leaving her standing there. It pissed her off, but I didn't care anymore. Mike called me a couple of times, but I let his calls go to voicemail. I listened to him apologizing, saying he wanted to talk about how the night had gone and that he hoped we could meet up. It was clear he was trying to ease his guilt, but I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, our friendship was over. One evening, I was washing the car when I went inside briefly and overheard Michelle talking on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't realize I was there, so I stayed quiet and listened. "Yes, it was wonderful," she said, laughing. "I know he's still upset with me." "Hey, you think so? Thanks." "No, Dave didn't get it. It was Mike who bought it for me," Michelle continued. "Yeah, I know it cost a fortune. He's such a sweetheart, and so handsome." There was a pause, then she added, "I would have, but Dave woke up when I was trying to get into." "Yeah, I know. Oh, it sure was not only big but hard too. Real hard." My heart sank as I realized my wife was talking about Mike to one of her girlfriends. "Oh, Dave would flip if he knew that," she continued. "No, you can't tell them." I have to keep that quiet." "I hope he does. We're trying to figure out when." "I know, but I have to be careful that Dave doesn't find out." I'd heard enough. It was clear that Michelle was planning to see my ex-friend again, and it was unbelievable how fast our marriage had fallen apart. I caught Michelle on the phone a few more times, and whenever I walked into the room, she'd either turn away and speak softly or hang up abruptly. That weekend, Mike suddenly showed up at our house in his big SUV. I was in the driveway working on my car when he pulled up, smiling like nothing had happened. Michelle must have known he was coming because as soon as he got out, she came outside with a strange smile on her face. We hadn't been talking much, so when she approached me and started speaking, I was immediately on guard. "Hey, honey, I invited Mike over for dinner," she said matter-of-factly. When I began to object, she held up her hand to stop me. "Listen, Dave, I know what you're going to say. You're still upset about that night, but I think you two need to talk. Mike wants to make amends, and we need to get over this and be friends again." Mike, who was just a few feet away, smiled and walked up with his hand outstretched. "Hey, Dave," he said in a friendly tone. "Good to see you, buddy." I just stared at him coldly, not moving. Michelle tried to diffuse the tension by slipping her arm around my waist and whispering, "Go on, honey," with a smile, trying to coax me into shaking Mike's hand. I ignored his outstretched hand, and after a few moments, Mike's smile faded as he realized the snub. "Hi, Mike," Michelle said, ignoring my glare. "I'm glad you came over today. I was just telling Dave it was time to clear the air." "Screw you," I snapped, cutting her off. Michelle's smile faltered. "Please, Dave," Mike began. "I know you're still mad, but, oh, you got that, did you?" I interrupted, feeling Michelle's arm tighten around my waist as she tried to keep me calm. She pressed against me, trying to kiss my cheek. "Don't be mad at him," Michelle cooed. "It's my fault, not his. Mike's been your friend for so long, and I know you miss him. He misses you too, right?" "Yeah, that's right," Mike added. "Come on, Dave, no hard feelings, right?" I shot him a look that could kill, then pulled away from Michelle. I stared straight into his eyes, wishing I could knock him out. "So tell me, Mike, did you have a good time with my wife at the charity event?" Well, yeah, of course we did, Michelle chirped. We wanted you to come, Dave. It would have been more fun if you were there. She hadn't said a word to me all week, and now she was acting all sweet and innocent. I wasn't buying it for a second. Mike looked uncomfortable, but I kept my eyes locked on him. So, did you dance together? Huh. Well, yeah. Everyone was dancing, Mike stammered. Michelle moved closer again, wrapping her arm around me with a sugary smile. Of course we danced, Dave. Everyone was having a great time. You'd have loved it if you'd been there. I ignored Michelle's irritating chatter and focused on Mike. So you danced, huh? Did you dance to the slow songs? Mike? Did you hold her in your arms, feel her pressed against you in that skimpy dress she was wearing? Mike's face twisted into a grimace, clearly thrown off by my probing questions. No, nothing like that, Dave, he said nervously. Just, dancing and having fun. Nothing inappropriate. I stared at him for a moment longer, then pushed Michelle away and turned to face her. In you, my honest wife. I sneered. Was it all just some casual, friendly dancing? Nothing inappropriate, like Mike said. Of course not, Dave, she blushed, stammering. I'd never do anything to disrespect you. You know that. I pulled out my phone and opened a picture. A guy I knew who was at the event had sent me some incriminating photos of Michelle and Mike. I showed it to Michelle, and it took her a moment to recognize herself in the image. Her face turned pale, and her eyes widened in shock. So, my faithful wife, I said, smirking, this is just some innocent, platonic dancing, right? Michelle stared at the screen, her face blanching as she saw how intimately she and Mike were dancing, arms wrapped around each other in a close embrace. Mike, much taller than me, was leaning down, and they were kissing, a still shot, but it was clear how compromising it looked. I flipped to another picture and held it up. Looks like you enjoyed that kiss, Michelle, I remarked. The next shot zoomed in on their upper bodies, with Mike's hands on her waist, and Michelle gazing up at him with a look of adoration. A nearby couple was watching with amused smiles. Michelle's face turned bright red as the full weight of the evidence hit her. Mike glanced at the photos, his own expression darkening. Where did you get these? He asked, his voice barely hiding his anger. The pictures didn't lie, and neither could they anymore. I flipped to another picture, showing them sitting close together in a booth, Mike's arm draped around Michelle's shoulders, his hand hovering over her chest. Michelle was leaning against him, her face turned up as if waiting for another kiss. The last photo was of them on a patio outside, embracing intimately. Mike was whispering in her ear, and she was smiling up at him, her expression filled with a kind of closeness that spoke louder than words. Michelle's face flushed deep red. It's not what it looks like, Dave. I swear. Mike stepped back, looking embarrassed. Dave, I know this looks bad, but nothing happened. I promise. His words only fueled the white-hot fury burning inside me, threatening to consume every thought. My so-called best friend stood there, making pathetic excuses, while my wife looked on, her face torn between guilt and defiance. I had reached my breaking point. You promise nothing happened. I repeated, my voice dangerously low. You expect me to believe that after everything I've seen and heard? Michelle tried to step forward, reaching out as if to comfort me. Dave, please, let's just sit down and talk about this. We can. Shut up, I roared, my voice echoing through the house. I've heard enough of your lies. My hands trembled with rage and adrenaline as I stormed over to the living room drawer, yanking it open. I grabbed the old .44 Magnum that had been stashed there for years, my fingers gripping the cold steel. Dave, what are you doing? Michelle's voice was barely a whisper, fear widening her eyes as she stepped back. On your knees, I commanded, my voice icy. Both of you now. Mike's face turned pale. Dave, this isn't necessary. We can talk, he said. Get on your knees, I shouted, pointing the Magnum at him, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, reluctantly, they both knelt down, their eyes fixed on the gun. "Now," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage, "you're going to tell me everything, every single detail. And if you lie to me, so help me God." Michelle started to sob, her shoulders shaking. Mike looked at her, then at me, his eyes pleading. "Dave, it was just one night," Mike stammered, his voice breaking. "We were both drunk. It didn't mean anything." "One night," I sneered. "You think that makes it better? Tell me everything, now." Mike swallowed hard. "It started a few months ago. Michelle was upset about your financial situation, and I guess I took advantage. We met up a few times, just to talk at first, but then what?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the magnum. "We kissed," Michelle whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was at one of the parties. I don't even know how it happened, but it did. And then, we met a few more times after that." "How many times?" I asked, my voice cold and unforgiving. "3, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I swear, Dave, it didn't mean anything. I was just so lonely and angry, and Mike was there." Mike looked at me, filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Dave. I never meant for it to go this far." Their confessions brought a twisted satisfaction, but it did nothing to quell the storm inside me. I wanted to scare them, to make them feel the betrayal I'd endured. But suddenly, Mike made a desperate move, lunging at me as if to disarm me. It all happened in a blur. Instinctively, I pulled the trigger. The magnum's roar was deafening in the small room. Mike's body jerked violently and crumpled to the floor. Michelle screamed, a sound that would haunt me forever. I stared at Mike's lifeless form, my mind struggling to grasp what I had just done. I never intended to kill him, I thought. I just wanted to scare them, to make them confess. But now, it was too late. Panic gripped me. I couldn't face the consequences of what I'd done. I turned to Michelle, who was still sobbing uncontrollably. "Get up," I ordered, my voice hollow. "Get up and go to the bathroom." She looked at me, terror in her eyes. "Dave, please. Do it," I yelled. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the bathroom. I followed, my mind racing. I shoved her inside, grabbed some rope, and tied her hands and feet, ensuring she couldn't move or call for help. Then I locked the door, pocketing the key. She had no phone, no way to contact anyone. Adrenaline was the only thing keeping me moving. My fear clawed at me, but my anger was stronger. I couldn't stop now, I had to escape. I ran back to the living room, Mike's body a stark reminder of my irreversible mistake. Grabbing the magnum, I sprinted to my car, my hands shaking as I started the engine. I knew I only had a few hours to reach the border. I needed to move fast. As I drove, I called my sister, who lived a couple of hours away. "Hey, sis," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need a huge favor." "Dave, what's going on? You sound strange. Can you take Emma for the day? Something's happened. I can't explain now, but it's important." "Of course, but just please do this for me." "I'll explain everything later. Just get her as soon as you can." She agreed, but I could hear the concern in her voice. I hung up, my heart breaking at the thought of what I was about to do. I called Emma next. "Hey, Dad," she answered cheerfully. "What's up?" "Emma," I said, my voice breaking. "I need you to know I love you more than anything. Whatever happens, remember that." "Dad, what's wrong? You sound weird." I have to go away for a while. I can't explain right now, but know that I love you and I'm doing this for you." "You're scaring me. What's going on? Promise me you'll be strong." "Emma, I have to go. Goodbye." I hung up, my heart shattering. I had no choice. I had to disappear. I drove through the night, my mind a whirlwind of fear and regret. I knew I couldn't risk being caught with the magnum. So I pulled over in a remote spot and buried it deep in the dirt, covering my tracks as best I could. Satisfied, I got back in the car and continued toward the border. By the time I reached the Guatemalan border, dawn was breaking. I knew this was my last chance to cross undetected. Taking a deep breath, I drove through the checkpoint, praying I wouldn't be stopped. Luck was on my side. I made it through without incident. Once in Guatemala, I ditched the car and made my way south, eventually settling in a quiet fishing village on the Pacific coast, far from the life I had once known. I took on a new identity, Alejandro Vargas, a quiet, unassuming man who kept to himself. I found work as a fisherman, blending in with the locals. I built a humble life, spending my days at sea and my nights under the stars, far removed from the chaos I had left behind. Despite the simplicity of my new life, the guilt never left me. It gnawed me, a constant reminder of a family I had destroyed. I thought of Emma every day, wondering how she was coping without me. One night, while working at a small dockside cafe, I saw a familiar face on the television screen. My heart stopped as I realized it was me. The news report detailed my crime, the manhunt that had followed, and the ongoing search for David Mason, the fugitive wanted for murder. They showed photos of Emma and Michelle, urging anyone with information to come forward. I left the cafe immediately, abandoning my shift, and fled to a more remote village deeper inland. There I took up work as a handyman, fixing boats and doing odd jobs. I kept my head down, learning Spanish fluently to blend in further. Though the work was grueling, it kept my mind occupied and my past at bay. Over the years, I built a small network of trusted locals, but I never let anyone get too close. I found solace in the simple moments, watching the sunrise over the water, feeling the warm breeze on my face, and the brief comfort of a friendly smile. Despite everything, I found a sliver of peace in this new life, though the shadow of my past lingered. One day, while repairing a boat, I befriended an old fisherman who had lost his son years ago. He often spoke of his grief and regret, unknowingly mirroring my own. He taught me to mend nets, navigate the unpredictable waters, and find solace in the rhythm of the ocean. We became unlikely companions, each finding a measure of comfort in the other's company. Years passed, and the news of my crime faded into distant memory. I was no longer David Mason, the fugitive. I was Alejandro Vargas, a man who had found a way to survive, hidden in plain sight. As I sat on the beach one evening, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had made mistakes, but in this quiet corner of the world, I had found redemption, however imperfect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew I couldn't escape my past entirely, but I had found a way to live with it. I stood up, brushed the sand from my clothes, and walked back to my modest home. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next. I had survived the darkest moments of my life, and as I lay down to sleep that night, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My journey had been long and painful, but I had found my way. And in the end, that was enough. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.